So Super Tuesday is finally here, the most important date on the Democratic primary calendar for the 2020 election, with a full third of delegates up for grabs. Leading up to today, several major candidates dropped out of the race, most of them for the moderate lane of the Democratic Party: Pete Buttigieg, Tom Steyer, and Amy Klobuchar. Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg also endorsed Biden at a rally in Dallas, as did Beto O'Rourke. Remember him? So this should all come as welcome news for Joe Biden, who was already gaining momentum in the race after his victory in South Carolina and strong back-to-back debate performances in the 9th and 10th Democratic debates in Nevada and South Carolina. His chief competitor for Super Tuesday, of course, is Bernie Sanders, who still remains the frontrunner in the nationwide polls and has been leading in the majority of Super Tuesday states in those polls leading up to today. But with all this extra pep in Joe Biden's step, we're already seeing results come in from several states. They're not all exactly as you might have predicted just looking at the polling. But we'll get to the results first. But first, let me just say if you look at the RCP nationwide polling averages, something that you'll see just over the last couple of days, the huge lead that Bernie Sanders had over Joe Biden has significantly diminished to just 1.4 points. So Sanders still having the lead in RCP's averages. The huge change happened just over the last couple of days with Joe Biden getting two really favorable polls. So Morning Consult's no poll found Joe Biden to lead Sanders by 8 points. And the Hill-Harris X poll also came out recently, showed Biden leading by 5 points. So huge swing, which could allow Biden to take the lead in the future. If these trends continue, it's really, really bad news for Bernie Sanders. But of course, the results that we see from Super Tuesday should give us a better indication of what's going to happen going forward in the race. So obviously some results are already in. So let's talk about a couple of them. First, let's start with probably the most critical race of Super Tuesday, which is, of course, American Samoa. This is I believe it's the only caucus of Super Tuesday, and this race has been called, ladies and gentlemen. So I can report I've gotten this in from CNN that the winner of the American Samoa caucus is Michael Bloomberg, which actually surprised me. I expected Joe Biden to win this race. It's got to be really disappointing to Joe Biden. I don't know if this will kill his momentum to see him lose American Samoa. I mean, this is a state that went for Hillary Clinton twice. Went for Clinton in 2016, also went for Clinton when she was running against Barack Obama. Before that, I believe it was John Kerry won the American Samoa caucus. So for Joe Biden to lose it, it's just a shocking upset. Usually you see the popular New Democrat win that race. So very shocking news there. This probably will be the only win for Bloomberg tonight. But okay, so let's look. American Samoa, by the way, is worth 6 delegates. So not the biggest race. So let's move on to the most recent race to be called by CNN and New York Times is Colorado. So Colorado, we had Sanders leading in the polls significantly. It looked like it was going to be a lock for Bernie Sanders, even with Biden's surging. And guess what? He indeed did win Colorado. So Colorado has been called for Bernie Sanders. We have another state called for Bernie Sanders. This one is a huge shocker. Vermont. Bernie Sanders has won his home state of Vermont. If you actually look at the Vermont polling, there was not a lot of polling for Vermont because he was very obviously going to win the race. So the one poll that I found on 538 had Sanders up by 38 points. So not too surprising there. But there are a ton of races that Joe Biden has won, which should be quite disappointing for Bernie Sanders fans. So one of these states, which actually Bernie Sanders did have some chance of winning, I expected it to go to Joe Biden, but it is North Carolina. So North Carolina worth 110 delegates, one of the larger prizes on Super Tuesday going to Joe Biden. Nearby in Virginia, also Joe Biden with the win in Virginia, and it's 99 delegates. This was not particularly surprising. Sanders a week ago was leading in North Carolina and Virginia in the polls, but these surges were very likely to very likely to affect these states because, first of all, they're very close to South Carolina, cultural connections there, but also we did see surges in the polls for him there. Now, another more recent call for Joe Biden is, he has won Tennessee. That state is worth 64 delegates, so those go to Joe Biden. Let's see if this is even. Okay. So even when just 0 or very close to 0% were reporting, we still had Alabama going to Joe Biden. No surprise there. Joe Biden, just as a rule of thumb, is expected to win most of the red states. Most of the blue states are expected to go to Bernie Sanders, and the purple states tend to lean towards Sanders. So Colorado, obviously a purple state, that one won by Bernie Sanders. Another very important purple state, especially for the general election in 2016, is going to be Minnesota. So Amy Klobuchar dropping out of the race and endorsing Joe Biden did two extremely interesting things in this state. So her leaving the race meant that in the polls it was Bernie Sanders clearly in the lead in that state, and no one could really touch him. But with her endorsement of Joe Biden, there is a good chance that he could pick up the state. In fact, according to the New York Times, right now in Minnesota, Joe Biden is leading the count by 3.9 points. Now, just 22% are reporting, so grain of salt on that, big grain of salt on that. But Biden is currently leading in Minnesota, which kind of demonstrates the power of Amy Klobuchar's endorsement. Of course, a lot of people are expecting as well that Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg stepping out of the race are very good for Joe Biden anyway, since they are on the same ideological lane. There is dispute about that too, because there was a poll that came out from Morning Consult that showed that the top second choice of Pete Buttigieg was Bernie Sanders, not Joe Biden, although there actually were older polls that showed that that he would go to Joe Biden. Sorry for the echo, guys. I don't know what to do about it. Are you guys getting the popping sound from my mic? I gotta get a new mic. Thank you to the patrons who will be by your donations will be going to a new mic when I can get one. Let's see what I can do. How's this? Is this better? Still big echo? No. Okay, Jack Horowitz, I'm an engineer, dude. Okay, tell me what to do. Is this better? Yes, no, pop, audio sucks. Get new mic. I will get a new mic. Thanks, Birch. Ooh. Do you hear me okay right now? Has John Lang popped in yet? I actually don't have monitors in, so I'm not sure why we're echoing. I don't have a monitor in, so it's weird. Okay, I'm just gonna try to carry forward anyway. Can't really fix the mic setup without killing the stream. Let me just get you. Let me get you the information, and we can carry over the conversation maybe on Twitter or something like that. I'll probably put up a video regarding Super Tuesday and the fallout and the context that we can drive from it. But let's see, where was I? Okay, I was in Minnesota. Okay, there's more races to talk about. Massachusetts is another important race. So we had Bernie Sanders leading in the polls in Massachusetts, and Elizabeth Warren was his closest competitor. Now with Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg dropping out of the race, sort of clearing a path for Joe Biden, I don't think it's been completely crazy that some people have been calling for Elizabeth Warren to do the same. So, yeah, at QT Politics is my Twitter. Thanks, Birch, for putting that up. Hey, it's John Lang. He's here. Okay, so in Massachusetts, a lot of people were calling on Elizabeth Warren to step aside and endorse Bernie Sanders. I also agree that probably would have been the nice thing to do. She really isn't likely to have a chance. It's really down to Joe Biden versus Bernie Sanders at this point, and it is true that Elizabeth Warren probably draws more support away from Sanders that would otherwise go to him. Very frequently, the second choice of Elizabeth Warren supporters are Bernie Sanders. So it is expected that if she dropped out of the race, and especially if she endorsed Bernie in the way that Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg have for Joe Biden, that would give some boost for Bernie Sanders. But right now, we have a very interesting thing going on in Massachusetts, despite the fact that those are the polls right as of, I took this yesterday. Currently, with I mean, again, not a huge amount reporting in, 16% reporting in to the New York Times. Biden leads in the vote count in Massachusetts by 7.7 points, which is quite dangerous because really Massachusetts should be a state that Bernie Sanders wins. I kind of did a little math myself couple of days ago and calculated what I expected to come out of Super Tuesday. And I sort of guessed Bernie Sanders to be in the upper 500 range in terms of gaining delegates, whereas Joe Biden would be in the sort of mid 400 range. But that really expects Bernie Sanders to win Massachusetts. So according to CNN, which is estimating 20% of the count in, they're finding Joe Biden also in the lead, 33.5% to Sanders with 25.9%, followed very closely by Elizabeth Warren with 21.3 points. So if indeed she had dropped out and endorsed Bernie Sanders, one presumes that Sanders would have already locked down the majority in Massachusetts. Instead, it's an incredibly close race where Biden is leading. Another very critical state, of course, is Texas, the second largest prize for Super Tuesday, worth 225 delegates. Now, I expected that this state would basically be split in half, and half would go to Biden and half would go to Bernie Sanders. I expected maybe Bernie Sanders would pull out the popular vote, but Biden would still end up getting the delegate win in Texas. Currently, according to the New York Times, with just 13% reporting in, so huge grain of salt, Sanders is leading by 4.9 points. So if Texas goes to either Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden, it's a big signal for their campaigns. It shows them to be a very, very powerful player in the race. Of course, the very most important prize of Super Tuesday is California. Now, the polls have not closed yet. They will close at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We still haven't seen any results coming out of California yet, but the polls do indicate that Bernie Sanders is leading in that state, though Joe Biden's numbers have been coming up extremely quickly. So if I'll level with you, if Texas goes to Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders might have a path forward and still potentially could lead the race, could possibly win. If Bernie Sanders loses California, that's probably the end of the plausibility of his campaign, and really Joe Biden pretty much has it. Unless it goes to someone else, then we have a weird situation. But Bernie Sanders pretty much has to win California. It is the biggest prize of the night, probably will be the most talked about, worth 415 delegates, so twice as much as the next biggest. Definitely a big prize to win, and the polling indicates that Sanders will take it, so we'll see if that does go down. Let's see if anything new has popped in yet. Okay, I don't know if I called all of the... sort of lost track because my mic was bad, but... here's another one. Arkansas. Arkansas has been called by New York Times with just 24% reporting in that Biden will win that state. That's not really a particular surprise. He's also likely taken Oklahoma. New York Times now reporting him as the winner in OK. So just 37% reporting in, but he was leading, and it was very obviously going to be a win for him. The interesting races to watch right now are Minnesota, Massachusetts, and Texas. Obviously, still worth watching. California as well. That's going to be the big prize. Another interesting one I think is Maine. I expected Maine would lean towards Bernie Sanders. I was expecting fairly heavily, but he's currently leading by just 0.8 points. So that's a little disappointing, although it is a very small state. It's worth 24 delegates for the final election. So currently, now obviously it's not winner take all when it comes to the delegates, but just to give you some general context, we have North Carolina going to Joe Biden. That is worth 110 delegates. Those, again, they'll be split up. But just to give you a sense of the relative size and value of these states, Virginia, also a win by Joe Biden, worth 99 pledged delegates. Colorado, worth 67 pledged delegates, going to Bernie Sanders. Tennessee, worth 64, going to Joe Biden. Alabama, worth 52, going to Joe Biden. Oklahoma, worth 37, going to Joe Biden. Arkansas, worth 31, going to Joe Biden. Now, none of those results are really a surprise. Also, Vermont, worth 16, going to Bernie Sanders. And American Samoa, worth 6 points, 6 delegates, going to Michael Bloomberg. And he's probably made the world better because of it. So I'm going to stop talking about American Samoa now. I think I gave you a lot of American Samoa coverage there. I actually expected, the one actually other thing about Samoa was that we could see, it was the one state where maybe Tulsi could have pulled something out because she does have, I believe, Samoan ancestry. So that would have been interesting to see, but didn't happen. It was the first thing to get called. I expected, at least because it's a caucus, it might have taken a while, but I think it's like 300 people participate, and then they just said there. I don't know why they went to Bloomberg, but he got them. So he's got delegates now, which actually means that he will qualify for any other debates going forward, unless they change the rules again. But they did come up with this idea that anyone who wins delegates automatically gets on the debate stage. So if you guys wanted to see a debate that was just basically Sanders and Biden after today, where Elizabeth Warren and Bloomberg basically lose everything and have no chance of being on the debate stage anymore, well, we've got delegates for both Elizabeth Warren and Michael Bloomberg coming out of Super Tuesday. And Bloomberg actually won an entire territory. No, not a state, but why shouldn't they be? They've got 6 fantastic delegates. Thank you. Okay, so I haven't been paying as much attention to the chat as I did last time because it was killing me just reading your chat. I think it made the live stream really, really uninteresting. But Junior Mercier says, Warren literally made Sanders struggle, takes 3rd in her home state, and keeps going. Yeah, it is kind of, as you guys know, I prefer Bernie Sanders. I think he's the best candidate. I've liked him for a long time. I do find it a little disappointing that Elizabeth Warren decided to keep going. She's also, I've seen recently in speeches and on the debate stage, she's been very aggressive attacking Bernie Sanders. And what's interesting is that Sanders really hasn't been hitting her back. She was very mad in that one time where he said he didn't say the thing that she said that he said. But then, and she yelled at him after the debate. But then she's gone on to complain and criticize Bernie Sanders and say that he and his supporters and his campaign are trashing her campaign. But she's constantly criticizing him. So I find that kind of interesting. He's kind of kept the alliance of they're not going to attack each other going, even though the fact that she's been attacking him pretty aggressively. And she didn't drop out before Super Tuesday to endorse Sanders. So let's be honest. I still think she's a relatively progressive politician. It doesn't change her history or her policies. But it does mean that she's not really she's not personally loyal to Bernie Sanders. She's not part of the Our Revolution crowd or the. I mean, she's always been quite clear that she's not a democratic socialist. So I'm not all that surprised. But she's one of the people who come from a more moderate path than Bernie Sanders, who call themselves a progressive, who I do really believe is a progressive. And I actually wish she wasn't so hostile with Bernie Sanders right now, because she, prior to Bernie Sanders running for the 2020 election, back in the early days of 2015, Elizabeth Warren, just for full disclosure, she was the person that I was hoping was going to go and run for president to take over after Barack Obama. She was the person that I wanted because of what she had done with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And I mean, she is fantastic. I really do like her. But she's been pretty disappointing for the progressive movement. And the fact that she's staying in the race now when she has no path forward, I mean, it's pretty difficult to see her as anything other than a spoiler. I hate spoiler arguments and as a sort of general thing, but when you have the same ideology as another person or similar ideology and you want to claim that you support them and your friends, it's very weird for you to stay in the race when you have no chance of, when really the biggest impact you can make is to draw votes away from the most similar ideological candidate. It's a little disappointing. I find it quite unfortunate. So again, the races to watch. So what's been called so far? I'm just going to give you guys a refresher just in case there's new people in the stream listening. Again, sorry for the echo or any audio issues. Ain't nothing I can do about it at this point. But Alabama going to Joe Biden, Arkansas, Joe Biden, North Carolina, Joe Biden, Oklahoma, Joe Biden, Tennessee, Joe Biden, and Virginia goes to Joe Biden. Joe Biden is also surprisingly leading in Minnesota. I guess that means that Amy Klobuchar stepping out of the way and giving him her endorsement really did carry a lot of weight. Biden also surprisingly leading in Massachusetts, where Bernie Sanders was strongly favored, where really Elizabeth Warren could have made an impact. Now, Bernie Sanders has locked down the state of Colorado with 67 delegates, and Vermont, of course, his home state, where I think there was only one serious poll of the state because it was so obvious that he would win. So that's 16 delegates for Bernie Sanders coming out of Vermont. Now, in Maine, Sanders has a very, very, very narrow lead of 0.7 points, with just 25% reporting in Maine. In Texas, a huge prize worth 225 delegates. Bernie Sanders is currently retaining his lead, according to the New York Times, with 15% reporting in, 6.3 points leading. I'm going to go over to CNN to see what they're saying about Texas. Now, they're estimating 40% reporting in, and they show the breakdown like this: 29% going to Bernie Sanders, 22.7% going to Joe Biden, and just 18.8% going to Bloomberg. So that's a pretty big lead of 6.3 points for Sanders over Biden in Texas, with 40% reporting in, which that's actually serious. He might actually win Texas, which is actually a huge win for Sanders. If those numbers hold, that he actually leads by that much, that is a surprise upset for Bernie Sanders in Texas. Now, if he loses Minnesota, that's a surprise for Joe Biden, but we can kind of chalk that up to Amy Klobuchar's power. But if Sanders has a strong lead over Biden in Texas, that is also a surprise. And actually, the margin there is probably more important than how much than Biden actually swing Minnesota, to be honest with you. Texas is a huge state, 225 delegates. Again, the biggest prize to watch is California. not sure if the polls have even closed yet, so we're not seeing any results from California yet. But yeah, the big prizes to keep your eyes on right now: Texas, Massachusetts, Minnesota. Did we call Utah yet? That just occurred to me. Let me see. Yeah, Utah, we're still waiting on results to come out of Utah. We don't know. Nothing. Got no results from New York Times. I'm just going to check CNN. Also, nothing. No results. Okay, so sorry if I missed a super chat. Jeez. Okay, I got to watch this more closely. Okay, Rob Bray, who's also my patron, asks if it's a contested convention, Biden will likely win. If Biden wants to win the presidency, he needs to extend an olive branch to progressives. That's a good point. Okay, so there's two ways that a contested convention can have you then can determine the results where the most popular person doesn't win. So if you have, let's say you have 5 candidates who are moderate and you have 2 delegates who are progressive, and all the moderates add up to 55% and the progressives add up to 45%, each one of those moderates might have less than the more popular of the progressives, but if all of their votes are combined and joined together, then I think that's totally fine for that to add up to a majority if you basically go to second choice, third choice. But the other way that a contested convention works is superdelegates, who are generally members of the DNC and sometimes also elected officials. They get votes as powerful as pledged delegates. They don't get to vote in the first round, but if a majority of delegates are not secured in the first round, then these super delegates or unpledged delegates are added in the second round, and they get to vote as well. And it is extremely likely that the unpledged delegates will side with Joe Biden over Bernie Sanders. They're very likely to be anti-Sanders voters, even if Sanders wins the majority of pledged delegates. So basically what that means is for Joe Biden to win the election, he needs to get a plurality of pledged delegates. That's regular people voting. Or he needs to stop Bernie Sanders from getting a majority. If Bernie Sanders gets a plurality, he's not necessarily going to win the nomination because the superdelegates will probably vote against him. What he needs to do to actually lock down a win is to get a majority of delegates. Now, it's very clearly not going to happen tonight on Super Tuesday. So usually at the end of Super Tuesday, you have the results in. You know who's going to win the Democratic nomination. It's pretty much over at the end of Super Tuesday. But with Bernie Sanders, this time around, he's not likely to win even a clear plurality at the end of once we have all these votes counted in. Joe Biden's comeback has come just in time to make it actually a very serious race now. Now it really does all come down to Biden and Sanders, and to some extent, Warren is a spoiler for Bernie Sanders, and to some extent, Bloomberg is a spoiler for Joe Biden, if we're honest as well. Bloomberg is obviously actually significantly more conservative than Joe Biden. I don't know why he calls himself a Democrat. He's pretty conservative. He's a Republican. he was a Republican until very, very recently, but he's more likely to draw supporters away from Joe Biden than he is from Bernie Sanders. Let's be honest about that. So even though it's very frustrating for Sanders supporters to have Elizabeth Warren, a very popular person, pulling votes away from Bernie Sanders, let's be honest that overall in the national standings, you actually have more votes being pulled away from Joe Biden if we're just looking at it on ideological lines, that the smaller progressive candidate is going to pull more from the major progressive candidate, and the smaller moderate candidate, Bloomberg's, I don't know if he's moderate, but the smaller centrist candidate pulling away from the moderate the front runner amongst the moderates. So yeah, Bloomberg is pulling away from Biden just as Warren is pulling away from Sanders, and Bloomberg's national standing is actually larger right now. He has 18 points on the RCP averages, and Warren has 11.7. Okay, so here's some news that just came in. The RCP averages have just updated with a new poll. No, not even a new poll coming in. I don't know why this is. That's very interesting. I just want to check this because it's very strange. It looks like RCP has just done a recalculation of how they're going to count the averages. I think they just pulled I guess they've moved past a certain period. They're pulling a poll out of contention in their aggregation. But now, according to RCP, this just updated for me just now, they're now showing Joe Biden to be the national frontrunner on the RCP's nationwide averages. I'm surprised that I'm live seeing this. This is actually very, very surprising. So RCP now showing Joe Biden in the lead, the new frontrunner with 27.3 points above Bernie Sanders with 26.7 points. What it is when they just pulled. I think maybe they just pulled Klobuchar. No, Klobuchar still. They just pulled Buttigieg out of the averages. I'm not sure why this happened, but they've just recalculated it. So this really shows how close they are. Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden are quite neck and neck right now. Biden now leading the RCP averages. He wasn't when I started this stream. Not good news for Bernie fans. So, still waiting for more results to be coming in. Minnesota, Joe Biden is still leading by 6.3 points, with 39 reporting in, according to the New York Times. That state is worth 75 delegates. The state of Massachusetts, which also was favored by Bernie Sanders, worth it's a pretty large contest with 91 delegates, is now leaning towards Joe Biden with 31% reporting in. He's up 7.4 points in Massachusetts. With Bernie Sanders, he's winning in Maine by just 0.5, just half a point. In Texas, the second biggest contest in the race, the biggest one that's sort of active right now, Texas with 225 delegates. Bernie Sanders is leading by 5.9 points with just 16% of the vote counting in, according to the New York Times. One other state does get added right now. Let's take a look at the polling there. Utah. So Utah is one of the more conservative states where Sanders actually was leading, according to the polls, and indeed with less than 1% reporting in, so really not worth serious consideration right now. But He is showing already to be leading by 14.1 points. It's quite a lead. He probably will lock this state down. But again, biggest state to worry about is California. California had been showing Sanders in the lead. Recent polling had shown surges for Biden in the state, as well as obviously nationwide. So we'll see if he manages to do it. But generally speaking, even though we had been seeing basically a huge increase in Joe Biden's polling standing in California, I mean, if you look at the most recent polls in California, there was one from Data for Progress, still had Bernie Sanders up by 7 points. The most recent by Emerson still had Sanders up by 17 points. In fact, to find a poll where Biden is leading in California, the last one was from mid-January from KGTV TV Survey USA. Okay, super reputable pollster. So since Sanders took the lead in California, he seems to have held on to it. But if you do look at the graph on RCP, it looks kind of scary for Bernie. All right, let me. It's comments time. Let me look at the comments here. Okay, guys, it's chat time. Someone in the chat said, "Look at the fucking chat." Okay, so what's up, guys? Okay, question from Wingflop. What would you guess Biden's chance of winning California stand at right now? I really don't expect Joe Biden to win California. The polling is pretty... I haven't seen a poll where he is winning in California, even though he has been improving his standing in the state. All the polls still have Sanders leading. He's just not leading as much as he was by previously. So I do think California will go to Bernie Sanders. I feel like he's got like a, 80% chance of winning California. Texas, even though Sanders is leading currently in the count, I don't really trust it until there's a large majority reporting in. I still think there's a really good chance that this state gets pretty much split in half. Yeah, so Texas, very important state as well, 225 delegates. California is not really all that close. It's very likely to go to Bernie Sanders. But Texas is extremely close. Wobert Bang asks, is Warren a centrist Trojan horse or game throwing? I don't think she's a Trojan horse if the idea is that Elizabeth Warren is just pretending to be a progressive in order to take votes away from Bernie Sanders. Oh, shit. Did my mic go off? Okay. So, all right. Anyway, so yeah, I don't think that Elizabeth Warren is a Trojan horse who's just pretending to be a progressive to take votes away from Bernie Sanders. That's not I mean, if that were the case, it would have been a pretty long game. for her to enter politics in the first place. First make friends with Bernie Sanders, actually, even before she enters politics. Then enter politics as claiming to be a progressive, fighting to actually create the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, working with Bernie on a number of things, and then becoming actually the most popular progressive in the country. I mean, really before Sanders started running for president against Hillary Clinton, I knew who he was because I was a big fan of his. I like the fact that he was the longest standing independent in American history, and that he was extremely progressive and ideologically pretty similar to me. So I knew who he was. I was a fan of his, but Elizabeth Warren was the most popular, well-known progressive at the time. It's actually really, I still don't know why she didn't run for president in 2016. So if she was a centrist Trojan horse, then a pretty long con. Now, why won't she drop out now to support Bernie Sanders? I think there's a good chance that she thinks that she'll get a good position in Joe Biden's administration. She might have been offered something. There's a good chance that she has just sort of deluded herself into believing that the longer she stays in the race, the better it is for her. She might also just, even though she's very progressive on the overall spectrum, she's still significantly more conservative than Bernie Sanders. She's far to the left of most of the Democratic Party, but she's still far to the right of Bernie Sanders. So it could just be that she's more comfortable with a new Democrat, someone from the sort of middle of the Democratic Party, leading the country instead of Bernie Sanders. Just could be the case. But I don't know. It's hard to speculate what is in someone's head. Someone asked, David Rojas asks, what is the best and worst case scenario for the rest of tonight? The worst case scenario, I'm assuming that you want Bernie to win with the question, but I'm just going to say best for Bernie and worst for Bernie. And if you're Joe Biden, if you're a Joe Biden fan, it's the opposite. If you're a Bloomberg fan, the best and worst case scenario is that you win America and Samoa, and so that happened. If you're Elizabeth Warren, if you're a fan of Elizabeth Warren, the best and worst case scenario is that you win a bunch of delegates, but you don't win any state. That it's what's going to happen. I mean, Elizabeth Warren's maybe best case scenario is winning Massachusetts. But she's in third place right now in her home state of Massachusetts. I really wonder if she's going to drop out after this, because actually at this point it's just in self-interest she should drop out. It's kind of embarrassing to lose your home state and then stay in the race. I expect that she will actually drop out after this. The best case for Bernie Sanders is that he'll leave having won California and Texas and Massachusetts and Minnesota and Utah and Maine and Vermont. That's his best case scenario. His worst case scenario is that he's won Vermont and Colorado. He'll lose Texas, and he'll just barely win in California. Because I really don't expect him to lose California, but if he's very, very close in California, that's really bad. Yeah, and then Biden, obviously the opposite. I mean, even worst case scenario from the Biden perspective, his worst case scenario, he still already has North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, Alabama, Oklahoma, Arkansas. Those aren't the biggest prizes, but yeah, I mean, worst case for Biden is losing Texas, which might actually happen. But at the same time, there's a very good chance that he could lose Texas, but then win Minnesota. So he loses a state that he probably should have won. Biden really should have won Texas. And I think not. If he gets really swept in Texas, he loses Texas and California. That's pretty bad for Joe Biden. But then if he also wins Minnesota and Massachusetts, that's pretty good for him. So if Sanders wins California and Texas, and Joe Biden wins North Carolina, Virginia, Massachusetts, and Minnesota, it's pretty even. Is this the end of Bernie's momentum? Well, look, momentum is created by and stopped by the idea by the media more than anything. Momentum. I mean, there's a technical sense in terms of polling aggregations. If you wait for the next poll, there's that sort of momentum. But what we're usually talking about with momentum is the effect of the media on a win. So if you are Pete Buttigieg, you were expecting that if you won in Iowa and New Hampshire, that would be enough. You get enough media exposure out of that to give you enough momentum to carry you forward in the race and propel you forward. And certainly he did get a bump in the polls after what did it end up being? Winning the delegates in Iowa, but losing the popular vote in New Hampshire. Losing both, but getting quite close to in second to Sanders. I think that's what it was. But anyway, yeah. So he did extremely well in those first two states, and he did surge in the polls as a result. But it wasn't enough of a bounce to keep him going forward, which I told you guys that it wasn't going to be enough. With Michael Bloomberg, his theory of politics is actually the opposite. He thought, I don't care about the momentum of the early states at all. I'm just going to start on Super Tuesday, and we're seeing the results of that right now. He's not leading in any states. He led in American Samoa, place that no one campaigned in, to be honest. Right, 6 delegates, not worth it. So, yeah, he spent, and he spent a ridiculous amount of money. He spent hundreds of millions of dollars and still came up short. It's almost a good sign for democracy. Janin asks, hey, question time. If Tulsi gets just a single delegate, doesn't that mean she qualifies for future debates? Yes, but they will probably change the rules. If Tulsi makes the debates again, I would expect that they'll change the rules. I don't know what the rules are going to be post Super Tuesday, because those were the rules that they were doing for Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina and Nevada. But they might say you need to have at least a certain number of delegates going forward. And I think that the DNC does not want Tulsi at these debates. And to be honest, I don't want her anymore either. It was great to hear her railing against regime change wars. And I like her on certain kinds of issues, but she backed away from Medicare for all. I don't really trust her as a progressive. I never really did. But I mean, I don't hate her, but at this point, there's no point in her being on the presidential debate stage. It really is about Joe Biden versus Bernie Sanders. And honestly, if she's really a progressive, really cares about progressive things happening above her own standing, above her own popularity, above her own nationwide standing, why is she still in the race? She should probably drop out and endorse Bernie Sanders, as I think Marianne Williamson did. Andrew Yang dropped out of the race. He didn't endorse anyone, as far as I know, but he stepped out of the race because he knew he wasn't going to win. He was taking money from supporters that wasn't really going to lead to what they were hoping that it would happen. So he did the classy thing and got out. So did John Delaney. Even though John Delaney obviously will, in the end, of course, very likely win. I'm just kidding. Okay. Does Biden have the cash to contest Trump's RNC's huge wallet? Asks Rob Bray. That's a good question. So, interestingly, Joe Biden has been doing poorly at fundraising compared to a lot of the other candidates. So, a part of that, at least in the later game, is the fact that Mike Bloomberg and until very recently, Tom Steyer were both running their own campaigns. Do you know who the number 2 biggest donor to Hillary Clinton in 2016 was? Tom Steyer. Who was number 1? Michael Bloomberg. So with those two guys running and funding their own campaigns, it's not going to the Democrat. To the establishment Democrat in the Democratic primary. But if Joe Biden secures the nomination, I'm sure that Bloomberg will send him tons of money anyway. And same with Steyer. If Bernie wins the nomination, I'm not sure. I think that Sanders would is probably just going to continue with his grassroots fundraising. Trump, but by the way, Trump has raised astounding amounts of money. Dylan Madhani asks, do you think Tulsi Gabbard is staying in the race just to receive a delegate and qualify for the next debate? I hope she isn't, because I don't see what the point of that is. John Lang, hey John, he asks, or he says, I want Mitch McConnell to become a communist and run for president. He has my vote. Sure. James Kuntz, you think Bloomberg will drop out? Yeah, eventually. I think eventually Michael Bloomberg will drop out. I think currently Bloomberg still believes that he's gonna win this. I think maybe tonight is the first reality check that he had. One thing that was super telling for me was during the debate when Bernie Sanders was naming all the the Rust Belt states where he was beating Donald Trump. By the way, if you look at you should watch my debate analysis from the last debate I put up, and I included in that I showed tons of head-to-head polls for who actually is the most electable, and the short answer is Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden. Nationwide, Biden versus Trump. Biden looks like he'll get slightly more on the popular vote. Biden does a little bit better actually in some of the more critical states, but either of them could easily be could be the most electable. You could make an argument for either of them. Sanders will probably generate more voter turnout, for example, and Joe Biden will probably appeal to more moderate voters. That's likely as well, right? Nerdy Skier asks, QT, aren't you from Canada? What got you into U.S. politics? Well, actually, what's interesting right now, I'm in the United Kingdom. I'm in Manchester. I was watching the Manchester debate in New Hampshire from Manchester, UK. I'm still in the UK right now. I'm here because not for any particular reason, my wife got a job here, so. Who would be the best VP choice for Bernie and Biden? I did one for both of these guys. The Biden one, I think, still basically counts. It's not that old. For the Bernie Sanders VP choice video that I did, it's pretty old at this point, but I still agree with a lot of my opinions. I still think that Bernie Sanders will win. I still think if Bernie Sanders wins, he's very likely to get. He's still very likely to get Elizabeth Warren as his running mate. Believe it or not, I think he'll still just put up with it. I think Nina Turner would be an amazing choice. I think Nina Turner is one of the best orators in America right now. She speaks better than almost anyone, so it's great to see. So it'd be I would love to see Nina Turner running as running mate. I think it'd be, if nothing else, it would be the most interesting VP choice to watch. She's also good at running an organization. I don't think it's likely though. John Lang, I want to eat poop. Cool, thanks, John. Okay. Let's see what else is coming up. Ooh, a married man. Yeah, I am married. Okay. Some more states to call. So, in the great state of Utah, Bernie Sanders has won Utah, called by the New York Times, with just 1% reporting in. But, they know something. Sanders is still leading very narrowly in Maine. 38% are now reporting in. He has a lead of 0.3 points. In Texas, Sanders is also still leading by 5 points, with 24% reporting in. And in Massachusetts, Joe Biden is still showing a strong lead with 7.4 points. Now we have another state to call, with 57% reporting in. The New York Times is now projecting Minnesota to go to Joe Biden. So that is really that's a huge pain in the butt for Bernie Sanders, because he really was leading in that state. So honestly, credit to Amy Klobuchar, because Amy Klobuchar was the candidate most likely to beat Sanders here. She was really the only one who was polling high enough to beat Sanders in Minnesota. But I guess her endorsement did it. I mean, people in her state really like her. She did it. So we're still waiting to hear on Massachusetts, California, Texas. Utah's done. Still waiting on Maine as well. Oh, the lead, by the way, in Maine is really getting tight. Bernie Sanders is down to 0.1 point, or less than. So, back to the chat. What are you guys saying? Is Bernie Sanders able to get a delegate majority out of tonight? No. There's no way that he's going to get if he got all of the states and all of the delegates in it, yeah, he would get a majority of the delegates. Is he able to win a plurality of delegates, more delegates than Joe Biden? Yeah. It's still possible. I mean, really, we won't know until we sort through the nitty-gritty. From the polls that I saw, the states where Sanders was clearly winning, like Colorado, California, Vermont, he was winning by very large margins. In a lot of the states where Joe Biden seemed to be winning, like North Carolina, Virginia seemed to be Joe Biden's states, he was winning by relatively thin margins. So once we break it all down and get into the nitty-gritty of how much they won by and how the delegates are assigned in each state, we'll know who actually won Super Tuesday. There's a very good chance that this is the beginning of the end of Bernie Sanders' lead in the Bernie Sanders actually his entire race. Could be the beginning of the end of his status as the front runner of the nominating election. Could be the beginning of the end for Joe Biden as well. If Bernie Sanders takes a huge chunk of all these states where if he still ends up with a good amount of delegates, at this point it's still unclear, and I don't want to make a clear determination on that until we know. What are your thoughts on Yang? Political analyst says Buddha Batty. Thank you for the super chat. Well, I've talked about Andrew Yang quite a bit. I think it's weird that he's working as a CNN contributor. I think he actually has a real future in actual politics. I thought that he was way too much of a newcomer to win the presidential election or the Democratic nomination this time around. But I thought he should run for office, or for a lower office, and work his way up. Out of all of the candidates in the 2020 primary, all of them, Andrew Yang was probably at the most original, most modern platform. He certainly had I think the best policies in terms of campaign finance reform. It was the first time in the context of American politics I've ever heard people talking about universal basic income. This is something that's been experimented with in places like Finland and Canada and a few developing countries as well. It's a very interesting idea. It's something that I like quite a bit. And, he made it a mainstream thing to be talking about in the United States. So I think he scored a huge victory just by doing that alone. But if you add to that the fact that his campaign finance ideas are extremely good, including democracy dollars. He has a lot of sort of libertarian leftist approaches, which are very interesting. There's sort of combination of what you would classically think of as socialist left, or generally progressive, but from a sort of using the market to create a more progressive world, which is very interesting. Rob Ray, thoughts on how the sudden Biden comeback happened? Yeah. I think it's pretty obvious how it happened. Really, South Carolina gave him a bit of a bounce, but then, wait a minute, why did he get a bounce from South Carolina when Bernie got the most votes in all three of the first three states? I mean, okay, fine. Oh, we're the Democrats, so we don't care about the white voters in the first two states. Okay, and also the first two, everyone thought, okay, he's definitely going to win New Hampshire just because he's from next door. And Iowa, it was such a mess and trying to report the results on that. And also, technically, he didn't win the delegate count there. So, but Nevada was a clear win. It's clearly Bernie Sanders, and also not so white, is it? Nevada was a great test of Latino support, and Sanders does have the most Latino support. By the way, Sanders also, at least the last time I checked the polls on it, also still actually has more support amongst the black community than Biden does. People are always talking about how he doesn't have enough support amongst black people, but most recent polling I saw from Morning Consult showed that Bernie Sanders actually had slightly more support amongst black Democrats than Joe Biden. Then how did Joe Biden lead in South Carolina and actually some other states that we're seeing tonight, but with the black vote? Well, with older black voters, it's Joe Biden. Older black voters significantly favor Joe Biden, and younger black voters significantly favor Bernie Sanders. And if you're in a state that has a younger population, then you're going to see the black vote going to Bernie Sanders, and if it's an older population, you're probably going to see it go to Joe Biden. Also, if it's a more conservative state, it tends to lean towards Joe Biden. If it's a more progressive state, it tends to lean towards Bernie Sanders. Pretty simple, actually. Jen Den, do you support the centricide? You're gonna have to ask me that again. I don't know what you mean by centricide. I guess you're saying, do I want the middle to completely collapse? No. I mean, I want the left to win. So right now, I think that what is it called, the Overton window is too far to the right. I don't think that the American politics don't really tend to what happens in Washington, D.C. doesn't the furthest left and the furthest right that goes isn't really aligned to the general views of the American people. Now, even in the general views of the American people, I'm toward the left. But if you actually look at what an average American believes, it tends to be somewhere within the Democratic Party, probably on the left flank of the Democratic Party in terms of just policy by policy what people like. So, no, I don't want to see the center collapse. I want to see the left have more say. I think they ought to. I think the right tends to have an exaggerated amount of power in Washington, D.C. Part of that is because of corporate money in politics, and part of it is because of the revolving door where people work for a bank and then they go and they're a financial advisor for the Obama administration. And part of it's because of essentially what gave birth to the new Democratic caucus, which is Bill Clinton basically saying, okay, well, the liberal Democrats aren't winning, so I'm going to be right in the middle. So everyone sort of moved to the right, and there's not really anyone pulling towards the left. There wasn't really until 2016, and Bernie Sanders sort of started to pull the country back to the left. But to be fair, now the country is being pulled to the left as well. What is so Banjo Box asks, what's generally more trusted, RCP or 538? So I guess you're asking in terms of polling aggregations. To give you a general sense, I mean, I think there's more people who watch my channel who think that RCP is better, trust it more. I use it more often for most things. And the reason for that is RCP just basically takes the most recent most recent polls for given pollsters within a certain date range of today, and they just sort of average it. So it's pretty clean and not really manipulated. 538 does a whole bunch of stuff beyond that to form their polling aggregation. So, for example, if you go to state by state, they actually use the nationwide polls to fill in the gaps with the statewide polling. They also they rank polls based on a lot of different indicators of quality. So how well they've predicted elections in the past, how many people were surveyed, what kind of polling it is, and stuff like that. So 538 does a more complex analysis. Now, if you trust 538's more complex analysis, then you should like their polls more. But I think there's really just a split. Some people like RCP more, some people like 538 more. I actually do look at both, and sometimes even 270 to win. Because usually if something does really well, then if someone's doing really well, if the sign is really clear, you'll see it in multiple polling aggregators. There's different ways to sort of do it, but you know. Would Bernie be winning right now if Warren had the common sense to drop out? Asks John Doe. Yeah. I think so. I mean, if she just dropped out, not necessarily, because she actually pulled in a lot of her support from Joe Biden supporters. If you actually look when she first saw her biggest rise in the polls, it looked a lot like she was pulling a lot of them from Joe Biden. But if you now see that, but if she dropped out right now, maybe some of them would go back to Joe Biden. But if she dropped out and endorsed Bernie Sanders, the power of endorsements is pretty strong. One morning consult poll I saw showed that it makes a huge difference. Like just analyzing Pete Buttigieg, I was looking at it because Pete Buttigieg had dropped out, and there were examples where like, okay, so Biden would have a 1 point improvement in the polls if Buttigieg did not endorse him, whereas if he does endorse him, then it'll be a 5 point jump in the polls. Things like that. Banjo Box, has being of Jewish descent impacted your politics at all? I think it has. So I am of Jewish descent, but I'm not religious. But I mean, one thing that I do think of is when I was growing up, you have Passover, where you basically are told that you're slaves in Egypt, and you personalize this to sort of connect with your ancestors. Now, I don't even know if the archaeological evidence supports that the Passover story, even without the miracles, is true. But the idea of associating yourself and your ancestors and being told and remembering to try to connect with the least among us, I think there's a clear connection between that and my politics, which are my first priority in politics, just for my ideology, is take care of the weak, the poor, the disenfranchised first. I mean, politics, we do. It's something Pete Buttigieg actually said in a debate, which I actually really liked a lot, was him talking about how it shouldn't just be about the middle class. We should actually take care of the poor. Now, I don't know if his policies quite reflected that all the time, but I think that that's exactly right. Although, honestly, I think that the top thing that affected my politics is my moral ethics, which primarily come from my mom, who actually converted to Judaism, and her ethics are very simple and universal, things like the golden rule. But also, the biggest thing that impacted my views in politics, I think, were actually studying philosophy, particularly political philosophy. So, I mean, people who've impacted me a lot are there's more modern people, but actually, like Immanuel Kant, probably the most influential on my political thinking. Are centrists humans? This is General Dan asking. Are centrists humans, or are they just animals that can be killed? Come on, man. Hassan Tahan, centricide is a J-Reg meme. It was a joke. Okay. I don't really... Okay. Logan McVeigh asks, question time, face reveal when? I think about it sometimes, like if you guys want a face reveal, I'm not afraid to show you my face, but also don't know if anyone actually really cares to see it. But if you guys make a demand for it, then maybe I'll set some kind of goal and do it, because I don't care. I'm not interested in people knowing me. Like, I don't really care to be famous, but I also don't really care I don't care either way. So if you guys want to see what I look like, that's cool. I'll do it. Do you think there was any strategy in Warren staying in the race, i.e. taking votes from Biden and Bloomberg and give Bernie her delegates, or no, just a pretext? No. I mean, before today, it looked very clear that at least before the weekend, it seemed very clear that Bernie Sanders was the only person who really had a serious chance of gaining a plurality. I mean, he was already significantly in lead, and we were seeing his numbers go up and up. I think probably people should have expected, I certainly did, that South Carolina would be a win for Joe Biden, and that the media would push it as, okay, yeah, he's back. Actually, one thing that Andrew Yang said that kind of annoyed me was him calling him the comeback kid for two reasons. One is, okay, Sanders won 3, he won 1. So I don't know why that makes him the comeback kid. Number 2, it was a nonsense thing that Bill Clinton applied to himself when he didn't even win, by the way. And also, third, most important, I think that even though Joe Biden is not my favorite candidate in the race, I'd rather Bernie Sanders beat him. I would never call Bernie Sanders Bill Clinton. And that is, that's a kind of insult that I think is not, it's not appropriate for public discourse. I wouldn't call my worst enemy Bill Clinton. It's a really horrifying thing to call someone. So. Still looking for information to come out of California. That hasn't happened yet. We're getting late in the night. By the way, so I am broadcasting from Manchester, UK, and so it's pretty late for me. Fun fact, it is 4 a.m. for me. By the way, okay, so little update on the polls. So I'm just going to give you CNN because they seem to be counting more in than New York Times, even though they're a little more difficult to look at. So in the race for Texas, Texas is again worth 225 delegates. Currently, CNN is showing 44% reporting in. With 18.4% of the vote counted so far, we have Michael Bloomberg. 24.3% of the vote counted so far is going to Joe Biden, and 28.9% is going to Bernie Sanders. So still a pretty reasonable lead for Bernie Sanders in Texas. In Massachusetts, we have the reverse case. So 56% are reporting in. That's pretty significant. Elizabeth Warren, this is her home state, is currently receiving 21.2% of the votes counted so far. Sanders, 26.5%, and leading in Massachusetts with 33.8% is Joe Biden. That's a pretty significant lead. So he's leading by 7 points in Massachusetts. This was a state where Bernie Sanders really had a chance to win, according to the polls. I'm actually pretty surprised by it. In Maine, Bernie has lost his narrow lead in Maine. So Maine now looks like it's going to go to Joe Biden with 63% reporting in, so it's not called yet. But Warren has 17.1 points, Sanders 32.7%, and Joe Biden 33.9%. And yeah, California, still nothing. Okay. Zaki says, question time. I feel your videos have become very biased and partisan as of late. They used to be very impartial, but now it has turned into a Sanders echo bubble. Do you have plans to fix this? No. I've always been clear about what my opinion is and what my perspective is. And I've always tried to keep that separate from what I think is objective facts that we should all be able to agree on. So I always want to be clear about what my bias is, and also be willing to look past it when I can, when possible. I think it is possible to look past your own bias. And to be honest, I think that's kind of I don't know if that's so fair to say. I mean, if you look at my evaluations of the last two debates, those tend to be my biggest watched videos as of late. I had Joe Biden beating Bernie Sanders in those debates, both of them back to back. And the first one I had Elizabeth Warren being the top leader, and she's probably the one who's most taking away his votes. If you're a Bernie bro who's very upset about about people taking away his votes, so I had her leading, and then number 2, Joe Biden, and then number 3, Bernie Sanders, as I recall in the rankings in my Nevada debate analysis. And then in my South Carolina debate analysis, I had Joe Biden beating Bernie Sanders. And Joe Biden is clearly his chief rival in the debate, so I don't see where the bias is. Sorry. I mean, if I'm honest that I like him, because, like, look, on bias, let's talk about bias for a sec, because I actually think this is a really interesting question. It's something that I'm constantly thinking about. So I won't tell you everything I think about in terms of bias, but I will say this: when you create a work of nonfiction and you're trying to explain to people this is how it is, you can either acknowledge your bias or not acknowledge it. A lot of people ignore their own bias and they pretend that they don't have one, and they try to give you quote unquote objective reality. It doesn't work, because the details that you decide to include or not include is affected by is significantly affected by your bias, your unconscious bias. So if I'm trying to actually give you guys the best information possible, I can tell you the truth that I can tell. I can tell you the truth as best as I can see it, but I also have to tell you what my perspective is. Otherwise, you're more likely to assume that what I'm saying is actually objective. Anyway, okay, I'm getting a couple comments saying that, look at that. So, if you look at Google, they are counting California with just 1% reporting in as having won. And I think Google gets their, from the Associated Press. So the Associated Press is calling California for Bernie Sanders. That's incredible. Okay, so the top prize of Super Tuesday going to Bernie Sanders, according to the Associated Press, with 32% reporting in. Bernie Sanders is also leading in Texas, where there are 228 delegates available. He currently has 28.6% share of the vote there to Joe Biden, 26.3%. Projected delegates, according to Associated Press, we see at least 23 going to Bernie Sanders, 22 to Joe Biden, 2 to Michael Bloomberg. So we see how close it is in Texas. Now, in California, according to the Associated Press, we still do not have any, still don't have delegate projections coming in because it's still so early, but the state overall is worth 415 delegates, and Bernie Sanders is projected as the winner according to the Associated Press. Now, New York, grain of salt here though, a little bit, because New York Times has not called it yet, and CNN hasn't called it yet either. Yeah, I mean, 1% is, when you guys said 1%, isn't that a little fast to call it? Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, like I said, grain of salt on it. It seems like he did. It seems like he did win it. I mean, AP is saying Bernie Sanders won California, but it is only 1% reporting in. So, I mean, they're pulling it from exit polls and stuff like that. Deegan 246 or 2468 asks, "Do you think Tulsi can be affecting Bernie or Biden?" Honestly, like, Tulsi's a big deal online. We listen to him. We listen to her. I think we're more aware of her than most voters are. I don't think older people even know who she is, to be honest with you. So I don't think she has a really strong impact. General Den asks, "Real question. What is your opinion on Florida need be a swing state since it is the worst one?" I live I live there. So okay, my actual opinion of Florida, I mean, I've been to Florida. I've only been to Florida a couple of times, and I think I've only been to Orlando. Yeah. So I've only been to Orlando twice. When I was a kid, I went there for like Disney World, and went there more recently for a YouTube conference a couple of years ago. Florida's fine. The weather seems nice. Yeah, like, I mean, okay, well, I'll tell you this. So there's this whole thing about, for example, there was a meme, the meme Florida Man, right? That, you get all these news stories about people doing these really crazy, nutty things in Florida. And, like, if you see someone does something totally ridiculous, it always comes out of Florida. And then it makes you think, like, oh, I guess Florida is just like a really crazy state. There's actually a reason for it. It's not that Florida is that people are nutty in Florida. It's that the rules are different in Florida in terms of media access to police records and things like that. So, like, at an earlier point in Florida than other states, the news media gets to access information about arrests and things like that that have happened, and things that would normally maybe always be hidden from public view are exposed in Florida. So all of these stories about Floridians being complete nuts who do all these crazy things, no, it's happening everywhere. It's just in Florida we actually get to see it because it's reported on. So Florida gets beat up and made fun of all the time, but honestly, there's a lot of positives about Florida. First of all, there's big Cuban population, which comes with, among other things, great food. Great weather, great beaches.
Yeah. Someone asked me about my Jewish heritage. There's a lot of old Jews retiring in Florida. What's not to like? Ryan Evander asks me, would you consider yourself Democrat, Republican, or worshiper of our Lord and Savior, Swaleni? This is a hashtag Delaniac question. No, obviously, I'm a huge Delaniac. The great slider. He's the only person who treats a Iowa slide with the dignity it deserves. I like Swoleni. I don't know if I've heard Swoleni because he's so swole, because he's muscular. I get it. But I haven't seen that before. Ryan, if you made that up, you're a genius. Snhobbit asks me, how are things looking for Bernie from this point on? What's the game plan? That's a very good question. We still need to really understand exactly what happens. But basically, what we're seeing is, when I look down the list of who won what states, I'm only seeing so far. Oh, okay. Gotta call something else, actually. Again, according to the AP, with 73% reporting in, the state of Massachusetts, with 91 delegates, has gone to... Oh. Okay, I don't have it. I don't even have the graphic over here. Sorry, I forgot to load up the graphic on this. But it's gone to Joe Biden. So Massachusetts has gone to Joe Biden. Joe Biden has won Massachusetts. That means Elizabeth Warren has been blocked even in her home state. And this means it's another surprise, a positive surprise for Joe Biden. So, as I count it, he shouldn't have necessarily expected to win Minnesota. He's won Minnesota. He shouldn't have necessarily expected to win Massachusetts. He really wasn't favored there at all. And he won Massachusetts. Joe Biden has actually now taken the lead in Maine. And we don't know if he will take that state or not, but that one was also expected to go to Bernie Sanders. In terms of states that were expected to go to Joe Biden, they're actually going to Bernie Sanders. Well, could happen with Texas, which is a huge deal. But generally speaking, the results are not all that surprising. I expected California to go to Bernie Sanders. It's gone to Bernie Sanders. Texas, I expected to go a little bit more to Joe Biden, but it seems like it's going a little bit closer to Bernie Sanders. But again, that was pretty much a split state. North Carolina, I expected to go to Joe Biden, and it went to Joe Biden. Virginia, I expected to go to Joe Biden, went to Joe Biden. Massachusetts, I expected to go to Bernie Sanders, went to Joe Biden. Minnesota, expected to go to Bernie Sanders, went to Joe Biden. Colorado, expected to go to Bernie Sanders, went to Bernie Sanders. Tennessee, Alabama, Oklahoma, Arkansas, all expected to go to Joe Biden, went to Joe Biden. Utah, expected to go to Bernie Sanders, went to Bernie Sanders. Maine, expected to go to Bernie Sanders, but be close. It looks like it could go either way right now. Vermont, obviously, expected to go to Bernie Sanders, went to Bernie Sanders. Of course, the big story that I hope you guys don't forget about is American Samoa. The American Samoa has gone to Michael Bloomberg. So, maybe Bloomberg's going to snag the nomination. You never know. He's got American Samoa. So, there you go. Anyway, okay, so I got Fix Your Mic from Cat Like Peak. I can't. I'm really sorry. This is the best I can do. I shouldn't have any playback. It's I gotta look into it. I gotta figure out what the glitch is. It's not with the physical. It's not the physical mic. Yeah, okay, so again, in California, even though the AP has called it for Bernie Sanders, again, just 4% are reporting in according to the New York Times, and they have him just leading but not secured California, leading by 4.6 points. According to CNN, they've now counted 3% reporting in. They're showing Sanders with the lead of at 25.5%. I guess one of the reasons why they called it is this: in second place in California, according to CNN, is Bloomberg with 21 points, and Biden is a distant third at 17.4 points. So now, if it was just winner take all with any of these states, hey Rob Bray, I fixed it with the microphone. I think the microphone is bad. My microphone's getting busted up. I gotta get a new one. Thank you to the patrons, by the way, because I will be getting a new microphone, and I'm gonna say that I'm able to do it because of you guys. So, generally speaking, if it was winner take all, we could do a quick math right now and calculate who's won Super Tuesday. But to me, it looks like, first of all, overall, Biden has done significantly better than I expected. Not a completely crazy upset. He still looks like it looks like he lost California. It looks like he might lose Texas. But he gained Massachusetts and Minnesota, which were not expected. So with Joe, it's clear he's so far the results are indicating pretty positively for Joe Biden, but not by a massive enough margin that I would say that it's over for Bernie Sanders yet. We'll have to actually take a look at who actually wins what number of delegates. I will tell you who it is certainly over for, which is Elizabeth Warren and Michael Bloomberg. Okay, Buddha Batty, thank you for the super chat. Buddha asks, QT, do you have a Discord server or a Slack? Interesting that you should ask. I actually just opened up a Discord server for my patrons over at Patreon. And I've been talking with them. They're very upset about the results so far. You can join me at Patreon at patreon.com/questiontime. I might sometime open up the Discord to non-patrons, but it's not, I don't have like a certain dollar amount wall on the Discord at all. Actually, with most of my goodies. But the if you join for like a dollar a month or $2 a month, you can have access to the Discord. But if you guys want access to the Discord, I'm sure I'll open this. I can one day open a server for everyone if you guys are interested in it. Okay, Rob Bray has shared a link. I'm assuming that this is Warren's message to her supporters. Okay, yeah. Let's read this. So, apparently this is coming from Warren's team. As a grassroots supporter, you're at the heart of this movement, and we wanted to give you an update on what's happening with Super Tuesday. 14 states voted today, and results are still coming in from all across the country. In fact, we might not know the full results of the states like Texas, California, and Colorado for a few days. That's interesting. Colorado went to Bernie Sanders. California almost certainly went to Bernie Sanders, AP reporting it. And Texas, it looks like it's leaning towards Sanders. Interesting. Delegates have not been counted and allocated by congressional district or state senate district, and that process takes time. But here's the bottom line. There are 6 more primaries just 1 week away, and we need your help to keep up the momentum. Okay, yeah. Interesting. So thanks for sending that over, Rob. So Rob Bray just sent that over to me. It looks from that message from Elizabeth Warren that she wants to continue to fight on if she's asking for more support. It's pretty sad. She's not going to win. It's really bad. I honestly, I don't care about people's personal relationships. I care about the politics more. But it's pretty sad to me to see Warren and Sanders fight. And honestly, I have to call it even. I really do think it's mostly on Warren. Oz DeKalbab. I'm sorry. Oz DeKalbab? Okay, I'm sorry. I just definitely said your name wrong. Says, why is Warren, in your opinion, still in the race? Why hasn't she dropped out when more successful candidates like Mayor Pete dropped out? Yep. That's the question. I just agree with your question. I've been tweeting about it. You can follow me on Twitter, by the way, at QT Politics. Okay, so from what I'm seeing overall on Super Tuesday, this is generally speaking disappointing results for Bernie Sanders. No matter how you cut it, it looks like he performed less well than expected based on the polls. It's going to take some time to calculate what the actual delegate count is, but I generally expected him to have an edge on Biden in terms of the total delegate count coming out of Super Tuesday. It looks like there's a very strong chance that Biden will have the delegate edge, not just on Super Tuesday, coming out of Super Tuesday, but overall, since the margin was razor thin between them leading up to Super Tuesday, and there's so many delegates at stake. So Biden could easily take the lead in the race. We're also, again, like if you look at the national polls, nationwide, in the national polls between all of the candidates, RCP's aggregation now has Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden in a statistical tie, with Biden now leading it by 0.6, 1/6 of a percent. So anyone who says that Bernie has no path forward at this point, before we've even calculated what the delegates are, I think is speaking too soon. I don't think you should panic. Folks in my Discord server seem to be panicking. But it's not over yet. What we have is a race on our hands. So the fight continues. Usually at the end of Super Tuesday, you know who the nominee is. Right now, it is looking like Bernie Sanders could become the nominee, Joe Biden could become the nominee, or we could have a brokered convention. And if we have a brokered convention, I believe that whoever has the most delegates that have that candidate as their first or second choice should be the person who wins. Not necessarily the person who has the most delegates as the first choice, but whoever has, out of the top two people, whoever has the most delegates, picking them as either their first or second choice should be the person who wins the nomination. However, if the superdelegates have any say in it, they may vote against that. If it happens to be Bernie who wins that, then it's likely the superdelegates will overpower it. And I think that's wrong. I think that's undemocratic. Sean S.J. Park, thank you for the super chat. Sean asks, what do you think Bernie saying he won't concede if... What do you think Bernie saying he won't concede if plurality? So, like, if Joe Biden wins a plurality, maybe give me a regular chat, Sean, to clarify your question. But there's a couple of things that you could be referring to. So, for something that actually Elizabeth Warren recently criticized Bernie Sanders about, was mentioning that Bernie Sanders, and I think it was in town hall or something, she mentioned that Bernie Sanders did not concede when Hillary Clinton had the plurality, and he really had no way to win other than through a contested convention. And now he has the other opinion. There was really only one special circumstance involved in that, in which I think that Bernie could have been right. Like, I think it was fine that he stayed in the race for the one and only reason that Hillary Clinton, according to the FBI, was under investigation at the time, which meant that there was a possibility that she would then actually be facing indictment or something like that. And in which case, that's actually the only reason that there really are superdelegates is to deal with crazy situations like that. That didn't happen, and then so it was fine, and then he conceded. But like, I mean, I don't know if he's quite a hypocrite on that. I can seeing it the other way, but honestly, like, she was, according to the FBI, under investigation. So, now in terms of should he concede should Bernie concede if he has the plurality? No. If you have the plurality, you're the most obvious person who should win the nomination. If Biden has the plurality and Bernie does not have the plurality, but let's say, like, Bloomberg's dropped out of the race and all the moderates have dropped out of the race, and Biden has a slight, tiny plurality over Bernie Sanders and Warren is still in the race. No, then I don't think... look, it's whoever wins the most pledged delegates votes honestly through a fair system of who has the most votes in the first tier, and then on the second round vote, they go to their second favorite. That's who I think should win. So, that's I think you should just follow what is actually obviously democratic. Luminary Prism 75, thank you for your super chat. Says, I'm honestly so disgusted by Liz Warren right now. Honestly, I'm pretty bothered by Warren. Pretty bothered by Elizabeth Warren because I would have thought that if she really cared about the progressive movement that she ought to drop out before Super Tuesday so that it endorse Sanders in the same way that Klobuchar and Buttigieg did for Joe Biden. And it's sad that she didn't do that. I mean, at the beginning of the race, the two, Warren and Sanders, seemed like the two people who had each other's backs the most. And it's really sad to see now they're the two that relationship is not even as strong as Pete and Amy's relationship with Biden. So it's sad to see. Ryan Evander says, question time. I just got an email from Mike Bloomberg offering $500 to canvass for him. You know, it's funny. I was some old guy in Iowa has this, like, for some reason was giving my email address. Just happened to. He thought that my email address was his email address. And he apparently was giving my email address out to people because I kept getting very specific things that very clearly indicated it was sort of an older guy in Iowa. And one of these things that I started getting was campaign emails from Donald Trump. So I was getting these emails as the impeachment proceedings were going on. So they were very fun. They were also I was actually shocked by how aggressive Trump's campaign emails were. Because I was getting emails that were like, "Why haven't you donated yet to Mr. Trump?" And I'm like, really? Although who knows, it could have been a scam. I don't know if those were actual legit campaign emails from Donald Trump, but like they seemed to have the right tone. So if it was a scam, it was a very good one. But it seems like if those were real emails from official mega emails, then they were pretty aggressive. I was pretty surprised by it. Question time. This is from Gavin Stapleton. Do you think Tulsi Gabbard could make the next debate because she has a delegate? Yeah, maybe. I think they'll probably adjust the rules so that she can't be in. I mean, they adjusted the rules so that Bloomberg could be in the debate, so I don't see why they wouldn't adjust the rules so that she's not in the debate. They did select very specific polls, and then when she was like, hey, listen, these polls don't make sense, and then they were like, no. Noobs Weapons. Michael Bloomberg bought out an ad in the Toronto Sun to get Americans living abroad to vote for him. Oh, the Toronto Sun. I know that newspaper because I was living in Toronto before I lived before where I am right now in Manchester. Toronto Sun is a terrible newspaper. It is. It's a conservative newspaper in Toronto, but it's also the bad conservative news. Like there's the National Post, which is actually a pretty solid conservative newspaper, and the Toronto Sun is pretty trashy. Like they used to have, I don't know if they still do, but they used to have like really young, like 20-year-olds or like 19-year-olds modeling for it. That they called like I think it was the Sunshine Girl. And they would have like a spread of like a girl in a bikini just to get you to buy their stupid newspaper. And then I think eventually they started to have Sunshine Boy too. They would have guys modeling, young men modeling in it too. It was a rag. Anyway, it's funny that that's the paper that Bloomberg is advertising in. If you're a Democrat abroad and you're reading a newspaper in Canada, I would assume that you'd be more likely, if you're a Democrat, to be reading the Toronto Star or watching the CBC or something like that. Steve Lynn, you in Toronto right now? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, okay, Steve Lynn. How bad is the Toronto Sun? It's ridiculous, right? Okay, Maxton 200 asks, what do you see in the future if Bernie were to become the party candidate? Will U.S. politics finally have an actual left wing? Yeah, I mean, Bernie Sanders is very much left wing. In a sense, there's nothing in the context of the rest of the world wanting to have a single payer healthcare system overall, not particularly extreme. In where I'm right now in the UK, it's scandalous for a politician to say something against the NHS and would any kind of idea of getting rid of the NHS. Which is more to the left than a single-payer health insurance program. And in Canada, even the Conservative Party supported the single-payer healthcare system there. So things like that, the idea of single-payer healthcare is pretty settled in most of the world. But the one thing that you can say about Bernie is that his Medicare for All program, I can tell you with experience, having lived in Toronto for quite some time, his the Ontario healthcare system is not as progressive as Bernie Sanders' single-payer system. I've heard some people saying that there is nowhere in the world where they give you as much as his Medicare for All program gives you. That's up for debate because it depends on a lot. There's certain things that, like if you look at France, like part of that whole system includes like childcare and things like that. Anyway, there are lefty proposals that Bernie Sanders hasn't been putting a big back behind. Not that he doesn't care about childcare, but like I'm talking about like at-home visits and stuff. Anyway, but I will say very clearly the Medicare for All bill that Sanders wrote, because I've actually read it. It does have a lot of things that you don't have in the Canadian system, like in the Ontario's single-payer system. Things that aren't covered include like prescription medication, glasses, I think dental, it's not covered. So there's a lot of things that you have to buy separately. Although if you show a financial need, you can also, they have another program where if you have a financial need, it's sort of like Medicaid where they will pay for other things that you might need if you show a need that you can't afford it. But they're, it's, like means testing. So why is it that Biden is gaining more traction from people, asks Jad El Khoury. A lot of it is South Carolina bounce. He won in South Carolina, which gave him a bounce. Winning always begets more winning. Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg dropped out of the race. He also received important endorsements from Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg, as well as Beto O'Rourke. I think some people still like him. Finally, it's the fact that the media has made his South Carolina win somehow more important than the first three states combined. And also, it's the most recent. According to RCP, Sanders 28.7%, Biden 28.5% in Texas, says Rob Ray. Okay, interesting. So neck and neck. Yeah, it is neck and neck for sure. Brandon, question time. What if Biden took Bernie as his VP? Could this help voter turnout and unite the left? I don't know if that's the left. I mean, the thing is, like, I think the thing that would be needed to unite the left would be Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders to make up. I honestly think that like those two personalities represent a huge portion of the left, at least that's in the public consciousness. Joe Biden, I guess Joe Biden is sort of in the left, but I mean, he's a very moderate liberal. Bloomberg, I don't think counts as the left at all. I think he's a conservative. But yeah, look, if you want to unify the Democratic Party, if Joe Biden did the thing that Hillary Clinton didn't do and asked Bernie Sanders to be his running mate, if Joe Biden won and then asked Bernie Sanders to be his running mate, then I think we would have a united Democratic Party. I don't think it'll happen. I don't think Biden will do that. I don't think. Honestly, to be fair, I don't think Bernie would pick Biden as a running mate either. But no, I do think that it would heal the Democratic Party to have someone from the New Democrats, the more moderate coalition, pick a progressive as a running mate, or to have a progressive pick a moderate or a New Democrat as their running mate. I think that actually, yeah, that would be a step in healing the Democratic Party. But to be honest, like, I mean, I see a lot from Bernie Sanders supporters, and I know that vibe pretty well, and I'm pretty sure that if Bernie Sanders won the nomination, then he picked Biden as his running mate. I think Sanders supporters would be really upset about it. I mean, like, when Sanders rallied for Clinton, there were a lot of Sanders supporters who didn't love it. When Sanders finally dropped out of that race, like, he did it when there were lots of his supporters asking him not to. So yeah, I mean, the Democratic Party is a bit fractured, as is. Well, I'll tell you what the Republicans do. They just if someone lost last time, they don't give that person another chance, and then whoever wins, everyone rallies and gets behind them. I mean, the Republicans hated Donald Trump, but then he won, so then everyone fell in line, pretty much. I mean, not Mitt Romney, but pretty much every Republican politician fell behind him. Whereas I think even if Bernie Sanders were to win the presidency, I don't know if the Democratic Party would line up behind him in the same way. I think there's more of a disunity. I think there's more disunity in the Democratic Party, and I think there's more of a disunifying instinct and impulse. It's also true that if, let's say, if Joe Biden wins the nomination and becomes the president, will the progressives be very happy with it? Not really. I think that there will always be. I think progressives will vote for Biden over Trump. But like, for example, Bernie Sanders was criticized for thinking of primarying Obama. That'll happen again. If Joe Biden became the president, and he wanted to run for re-election, which is actually a question with Joe Biden, by the way, then yeah, there would be progressives considering primarying him. QT, do you think Elizabeth Warren is running as a progressive to undermine Bernie to get Biden's VP slot? I think it's a possibility. I think it's a possibility that Elizabeth Warren is trying to get a VP slot. I think, actually, to be honest, I think that a reason that she didn't endorse Bernie Sanders in 2016 was she was thinking that she would get a VP nom from Hillary Clinton. I think she was expecting something like that, something from Hillary Clinton, either to be named her running mate or to have a place in the White House. So I think, fool me once, shame on you. And in the words of George W. Bush, I'm the fool that can't be fooled again. But yeah, I mean, it's possible that she was offered a VP slot. It's possible that she was offered something else. But to be honest, she was offered quite a bit by Bernie Sanders. And if she had lined up behind Bernie Sanders, there was a very good chance that she would have been both his, I think it was Secretary of the Treasury and his running mate and his vice president. I mean, but she didn't like it. So I don't know. QT, Tammy Baldwin for Biden VP pick. I did a video about it. Check out my video. I showed you my points. I stand by what I said in my video. Rob Bray, who even was Hillary's running mate? You know exactly. Okay, I'm just checking in with the polls. See if we have any more states called. No. Okay. I'll give you a little bit of an update. So in California, again, has been called by the AP for Bernie Sanders, but I don't really trust that. So now we have 14% of the vote according to the New York Times, and he's leading by 8.6 in Texas, with 54% reporting. Bernie Sanders now leads by a very lean margin of just zero point 0.4 points in Texas, according to the New York Times. In Maine, it is still over on Biden's side with 56% reporting. We see 0.5% of the 0.5 point lead for Biden there. Now look at the CNN stats just in case it's a little bit different. So according to CNN, in California, they're estimating 22% in. Sanders leading with 28.3% of the vote. Bloomberg 19.2%. Biden 17.0%. So very disappointing results for Biden in California. Now in Texas, if I can find it on CNN's website. In Texas, Sanders is leading with 28.6, just 0.4 above, 28.2 reported for Joe Biden. Bloomberg 17.4. This is 55% reporting in Texas. So basically, Biden. Sanders was taking the early lead in Texas, but now it's sort of shifting over where Biden's within striking distance. Good chance for this. A possible reason for this is the fact that sometimes urban areas will report faster than more rural zones, and Sanders tends to lead in urban areas. Biden tends to lead in more rural suburban areas. It's also, by the way, at the end of the day, if you just count up the total percentage of the votes for everyone, you'll be biased. You'll be, if you just added up everyone's percentage of vote and directly connected that to the delegate counts, you would project that Bernie Sanders would win more delegates than he actually will, because he's more likely to have them more concentrated into certain urban areas. And so just the vote percentage alone will probably underestimate the success of both Joe Biden and actually Michael Bloomberg, and it'll and obviously vice versa. So Texas still too close to call. There's one other little state worth looking at, which is Maine. In Maine, 78% are now reporting in, 33.4% favoring Biden, 32.9% for Sanders, 16.8% for Warren. 78% reporting in. So I mean, even though it's such a short lead, there's pretty good chance that Biden will take Maine. Texas is really too close to call. California, the biggest prize, almost certainly Sanders. I mean, again, it looks like it's been called by the AP. Yeah, Maine's still not called by the AP. Texas still not called, but Bernie Sanders leading. So let's just go down all the states one more time, just so you know. So California, Bernie Sanders. Texas, too close to call at this point. California's 415 delegates, 225 for Texas. But I'll tell you right now what the result in Texas is. It's going to be pretty evenly split between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. North Carolina, worth 110 delegates. Joe Biden leads there. Joe Biden also leads in Virginia, worth 99 delegates. for the state overall. In Massachusetts, a state where we expected Bernie Sanders to lead and Elizabeth Warren to come in second, Elizabeth Warren has come in third, and Bernie Sanders has come in second, and Joe Biden took the lead and won the state of Massachusetts with 91 delegates. Minnesota worth 75 delegates. Bernie Sanders was clearly leading in that state, contested only by Amy Klobuchar before she dropped out of the race and endorsed Joe Biden, who has taken the state worth 75 delegates. Colorado worth 67 delegates went to Bernie Sanders, as expected. Tennessee worth 64, Joe Biden. Alabama, which is worth 52, Joe Biden. Oklahoma worth 37, Joe Biden. Arkansas 31, Joe Biden. Utah 29, Bernie Sanders. Vermont worth 16, Bernie Sanders. And Maine still too close to call, leaning towards Joe Biden right now. Texas leaning towards Bernie Sanders. And that's about it. I mean, California also... a lot of places have not called California yet. So New York Times hasn't, CNN hasn't, but it does seem like he's leading by a pretty strong margin. New York Times now showing him leading, Bernie Sanders leading in California by 9.5 points with 23% reporting. His lead in Texas quickly diminishing, though, with 57% reporting. Sanders' lead is now less than 1 point. So, in the context of the overall race, this is not the end. We will see how the delegates will end up being split up. For all the contestants, I guess you would call them. But no, really, this is the end for Elizabeth Warren. This is the end for Michael Bloomberg. This is the end for who else is in the race. Tulsi Gabbard is a joke. Everyone other than Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders need to get out of the race at this point. I call on all of them to quit. They have no chance. They need to quit so that we can actually have just a clear, simple election from this point forward. Narrow it down. They should all be dropping out other than Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. We're the only two who have a chance. And then for the rest of the race, it's just Joe Biden versus Bernie Sanders, we can actually have a clear answer, and we won't go into a contested convention. So that's what I expect. That's what I think should happen. I'd be disappointed in anyone who doesn't drop out of the race whose name isn't Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden at this point. So again, we do need to worry about the next round of votes that will be coming in. So I'll put this together. I'll get some good sense of how many delegates each candidate has won, and I'll report it to you guys when I can. I'm about to go on vacation actually in Scotland for a couple of days, but I'll be back soon. But yeah, looks like overall pretty disappointing night for Bernie Sanders, and a night where he was expected to win more delegates. It's not clear that that's going to happen now. It honestly, a lot of it comes down to how big the leads are in each state, and how those delegates get distributed. So, I mean, I'm not 100% sure who won. I mean, it's looking to me like Biden probably will squeeze out more delegates than Sanders, just based on the way it's going. But we won't know for sure for a while. But what is pretty clear is that Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders are both going to stay in the race after this, and ought to stay in the race after this, and we'll see which of the two is going to win. So that's about it okay. There's one more piece of news. In Texas, Joe Biden has now taken a very narrow lead. in the count in Texas. Yeah. So 0.4 points ahead. 58% reporting in. So still too close to call, but that's another bad sign for Bernie Sanders. So overall, I mean, yeah, okay. I mean, Biden, I expect Biden will probably get more delegates out of Super Tuesday than Bernie Sanders, which is super disappointing because I was expecting Bernie Sanders to get more delegates than Joe Biden. Joe Biden has also taken the lead in the RCP polling averages. So, bad night to be a Bernie Sanders supporter like myself. But there are still... what is very, very clear is that in the next few days and weeks, we will see... in the next few days, at least, hopefully, we'll see that we're going to see a very close race between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. Hopefully, the other candidates get out of the way so we can actually see a clear race between the two of them. I think that that's what the American people deserve. That's what Democratic supporters deserve to see. That's what independents deserve to see. So, overall, takeaway: disappointing night for progressives. Not the end of Bernie Sanders' campaign. The fight continues. We'll see how he does in further races, but this should have been a good night. This should have been a good night for Bernie Sanders, and it is a bad night for Bernie Sanders, it looks like. So good, yeah, really good night for Joe Biden, and that's pretty bad for the future for Bernie Sanders, because he's got to, for Bernie Sanders to win at this point, he's got to bounce back. So we should see a strong performance in the next debate, and hopefully he didn't lose by that many delegates. Or, I mean, you never know, he could actually end up winning it. But it looks like he probably lost the delegate count. A lot of this has to do with Holland 220 just said, really troubling polls for Sanders. I blame Warren. Yeah, I mean, look, Warren did just spend a lot of time trashing his campaign, to borrow a phrase, and also at the same time scooping up a pretty large percentage of the progressive voters. So, yeah, let's be honest. She's not really an ally of the. She's not an ally of Bernie Sanders for sure. She's not really she's not more loyal to the progressive movement overall than she is to her own political ambitions, whatever they happen to be. To be honest with you. So, yeah, I think definitely a bummer of a night for a Bernie Sanders supporter like myself. But we'll see what the full damage is in the coming days, and whether or not he still has a clear path to securing the nomination. I think he really does. I think he'll still end up having a clear path to the nomination. I remember, you guys were talking about Kyle Kulinski in the chat a moment ago, and I remember I was watching Kyle, I think just a few hours ago, and he was like, is it going to be a strong plurality that Bernie Sanders wins by, or a soft plurality? I think he's going to win by a big plurality. Well, it looks like he might not actually win the night at all. We're actually probably going to see, there's a very good chance that Joe Biden will win more delegates. It's not a good night for Bernie Sanders. Rob Bray says, does this damper Sanders' argument about voter turnout? Oh, because the voter turnout looks like it was pretty good, but then he still didn't do well. Is that what happened? I don't know what the voter turnout was. But the important, to me, the important argument about voter turnout is Bernie Sanders basically, I mean, he's argued that if there's big voter turnout in the primary races, then that's going to be good for him. And if it's a low voter turnout, then it means that he's going to lose. And actually, we've pretty much seen the opposite. We saw pretty low voter turnout, and he did well in earlier states. No, I mean, generally speaking, the progressive left-wing approach to winning a general election is to generate huge voter turnout and get a lot of excitement going, and so that you can actually win the election. Whereas the moderate approach to winning an election is to try to scoop up the neutral people in the middle who haven't really decided. And both valid theories about politics. If you actually look, back in 2015 or 2016, I did a video, or actually broke down, okay, here are I can't remember how many elections I went back, but I went back a ton of presidential elections and looked at what the variation in voter turnout was, and what the variation and with the current statistics of how many people are moderate, how many people actually switch from one party to another. And my math at the time found that actually mobilizing your base is a far more important factor than winning over the middle. At least that's how the math added up at the time. I expect that by several times over, by the way. But I still think theoretically, it's still possible to be somewhat in the middle and get everyone really excited and also win over the middle. I mean, that could happen. I don't think that's important, I don't think that's impossible, but I do think that getting your own voters to go and turn out and go and vote for you and be excited to vote for you is more important than trying to scoop over independents of any kind, whether they're very progressive independents or moderate independents. Did QT just say math? Yeah. I like Andrew Yang. I don't hate Andrew Yang. I don't like him being on CNN, though, because I'm not a big fan of their commentary in general. Yeah, just in terms of the primary race overall, there is some sense in which Joe Biden is potentially the most electable candidate. He is the overall averages, according to RCP last time I checked, he's the most likely to get the largest popular vote, according to the RCP averages. But if you look state by state, actually, I think Bernie Sanders has a little bit of an advantage in some of the more critical battleground states. In terms of debating, I do think that overall Bernie Sanders has done better in debates overall than Joe Biden. There actually were better debaters in the field than either of these guys. And I think Biden would not be as good at debating Trump as Bernie Sanders, personally. But they both have some chance of beating Trump. And I want to be really honest about this, because a lot of people in this race did not have a chance of beating Donald Trump. Michael Bloomberg has very little, almost no chance of beating Donald Trump. Elizabeth Warren has less chance of beating Donald Trump. Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, Tulsi Gabbard, none of them had a chance, not anywhere close to a chance of beating Donald Trump. Really, Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden could beat Donald Trump, according to the statistics that are available. But the truth is, I do think that Biden will be worse in debates. Because, I mean, he's had a couple of good debates now, just in time for Super Tuesday. But, I mean, the majority of those debates, you look back, he's fumbling all over his words. He even fumbled over his words now. I think we're just sort of used to it almost. But, I mean, Biden's a time bomb. I do worry. he's got a lot of issues. He's had a lot of bad runs for president in the past. You can watch my videos about what kind of problems Biden can run into. But of the entire field, he's one of the more he was always one of the more electable candidates. So I got to give him that. And he's also, if we have to run Joe Biden against Donald Trump, if that's what it comes down to, he does have a better chance of beating Trump than Hillary Clinton. If he had run in 2016, he probably would have won. He probably would have beat Trump. The big difference between Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton is that Hillary Clinton had extremely low approval ratings, incredibly unfavorable, hated person. The only person almost as unfavorable as Donald Trump. Whereas Joe Biden is actually incredibly popular, have very high favorability. Janin says, question time, I disagree. I have seen so many people say that Tulsi is the only one they'd vote for over Trump. Sure, I'm not saying that there aren't those people. There's tons of those people who say that about Yang. There's tons of people who say that about, honestly, a lot of different candidates. The problem is it's anecdotal, right? I mean, I have a lot of people around me who believe often similar things to me. That's sort of a normal part of society. I mean, if you go into the building at this CNN headquarters, I think you're going to find a lot of people who think that the only electable candidate is Joe Biden, and that black people would never vote for Bernie Sanders, and a lot of stuff like that, which is not statistically true if you actually look at the polls. So if you look at the polls, Tulsi Gabbard and Michael Bloomberg are the most disfavored candidates overall by Democrats, for better or for worse. And this was before she voted against impeachment. So, and believe it or not, even though, I mean, a lot of people agreed with her vote, certainly her fans did, but no, I mean, like, Democrats don't generally like Tulsi Gabbard. Okay, so I don't think that we're going to see the results come in for Texas yet. Or from Maine. So this is pretty much most of the night. We've seen most all of it right now. So still waiting on Texas, still waiting on Maine. Based off pure statistics such as head-to-head polls, gambling odds, nationwide approval, do you agree that Yang would have beaten Trump? Asked Buddha Batty. I actually have not seen any head-to-head polls that show where I haven't seen head-to-head polls that even calculate Andrew Yang versus Donald Trump. But I like Andrew Yang, and there were indications that there were a lot of people who voted for Yang that people who voted for Trump who then supported Yang, and he certainly messaged in a way that was inclusive to Trump supporters. But no, I mean, there's certainly, I don't think there's no statistical evidence like head-to-head polls that I've seen that indicate that Yang would have beat Trump. I think that there's a good case to be made, but the reality is, like, how are you going to beat Trump if you can't even be a major competitor in the Democratic field? Like, I think America may not be ready for Yang yet to be the leader, but certainly the young people are. Certainly young people like him. But yeah, we'll see. So anyway, by the way, guys, I've been coughing a little bit, which reminds me of the coronavirus. So everyone bundle up and do all the things that you need to not catch the coronavirus. I don't have the coronavirus. I'm just saying, don't catch that coronavirus. Yeah. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens in the days ahead. So I want to thank you all for watching. I want to thank you all for, let's see. Can I see who gave a super chat? Yes, I can. Okay. Oh, cool. Okay. Buddha Batty, Rob Ray, Luminary Prism 75, Sean S.J. Park, Buddha Batty again, and Rob Ray again, Cat Like Peak, Junior Mercier, Finn Shoaps. I want to thank all of you for your super chats, and also a big thank you to everyone who's if any of you are new patrons. I've had a bunch of you guys, a bunch of new patrons sign up over the past little bit. Actually, I see right now 2 probably from this live stream. So Buddha Batty just signed up as a patron, and also Brendan. So thank you, new patrons. I also have just over the last couple of days, I've had a bunch of new patrons come and support me at patreon.com/question time. Oh, thank you to Xavier Oris, who just gave me another super chat. If Bernie doesn't get the nomination, who would you prefer, Biden or Warren? I think Biden's more electable, so there may be a strategic reason to pick Biden over Warren. But I like Warren's policy a lot more. And I don't care how I feel about them as a person, to be honest. So if I could guarantee that this person would become the president, then I would much prefer Warren over Biden. If not, then I really have to dig into the stats to be for sure about it. But I would rather pick someone who's moderate, who can definitely beat Biden, versus someone who's rather marginal in terms of popularity. And the thing is, I don't know if Warren's got the ability to. I don't think she has the ability now to mobilize that base. She's upset a lot of progressives, and she's sort of a moderate. Okay, yeah. So I don't know if it's Xavier or Xavier or X-Xavier. But I'm just I'm leaving them all out there. So whichever it is, I'm assuming it's Professor Xavier Oris. Thank you for your super chat. Could be Xavier. Oh, you're Australian, not French. Okay. All right, so it's Xavier. M asks, question time. Do you think we'll ever have a female president? Yes, one day. Oh, here's some other patrons I want to thank. Other than Brendan Buddha, who just signed up, Willem Bowman, Sean Loney, John Paul, Laura Jackson, Logan Goodnature, Nate Maddox, Jacob Kite, Ethan Griffith, Logan Belknap, Trey Sullivan, Mike LeBlanc, Way to Dawn, Charlotte Townsend, Comic 616, Eli Duinick, Turtle, Bad Art Collective SD, Giovanni Hernandez, James Newham, Kolja Nemeth, and Ethan, all actually just signed up pretty recently, like within the last week. So thank you so much for all your support. And appreciate it very much. If you guys want to get shout outs like that, you can go to patreon.com/question time and support me on Patreon. So thank you all for your super chats and for the lively discussion. You guys are awesome. I'm not too excited about today. It was pretty bummer of a night. Can't believe I stayed up till 5:30 in the morning my time over here in England for a pretty bummer of a Super Tuesday for a Sanders supporter like me. But the race goes on, and as a politics creator, it's kind of good that Bernie didn't sweep it, because basically that's what it was gonna come down to. But instead, it's Sanders versus Biden. By the way, if you're a patron or if you donate and I just answer your question or whatever, and I say your name wrong, like, I'm bad at pronouncing names. Okay. Ishmael Wadi, you're English too? No, I'm not English. I just live in England right now. Hey, Kevel. Rob Bray, good night, QT. Good night. Yeah, I'm in Manchester, England. Oh, man. Okay, I'm reading this because you probably didn't think I would say it. The CEO of Fat Bitch Incorporated said QT eats nut all the time. Probably didn't expect me to read that one. England is my city, says Birch Tree. What a great line. England is my city. I know that rap song. He didn't even write that. The more popular one. The one who's one of the two famous boys. Like, the guy who said England is my city, who's actually English, was reading rap lyrics that were written for him by the is it Jake Paul? By Jake Paul. Jake Paul wrote that silly, stupid thing. But yeah, now England is my city. I just wanted you guys to know that guy who got made fun of so much, it wasn't his fault. All right. Okay, so good night, everybody. This has been a very fun stream. I love you guys. The story continues.